and our guest presenter, Anna Jones-Crabtree. I'll do a quick introduction here. Anna and her husband, Doug, own and manage Vilicus Farms. It's a first-generation organic 12,500 acre dryland crop farm in Northern Hill County, Montana. And they grow a diverse array of organic heirloom and specialty grain, pulse, oilseed, and broadleaf crops under both 5 and 7 year rotations. Over 14 different seasons, Vilicus Farms grew from 1,280 acres to become a nationally recognized farm. They used a lot of these USDA beginning farmer programs. They've employed extensive conservation practices, and they foster unique risk-sharing relationships with food companies and land investment firms. Over 26% of their land is in non-crop conservation, and 400 acres have been ceded to native pollinator habitat. Annually, they seed over 3,000 acres of cover crops and use integrated grazing as well. Vilicus Farms became Be Better certified in 2019. And that same year, they became Real Organic Project certified, and they've been transitioning towards Demeter Biodynamic certification. They're also building the next generation. They have hosted 14 apprentices, many interns, and more farm campers than can be counted. Anna holds a PhD in civil and environmental engineering with a minor in sustainable systems from Georgia Institute of Technology. She currently serves on Xerces Society Be Better Advisory Board. Thank you for that service, Anna. Also, she serves as vice chair of the Iroquois Valley Farmland REIT's Board of Directors and the Biodynamic Alliance's Economy Advisory Board. Anna served on the USDA Secretary's Advisory Council on Beginning Farmers and Ranchers and is a Donella Meadows Leadership Fellow. She still holds an off-farm position as a regional director for the northern region of the U.S. Forest Service. So many things that you're involved in, and now we're looking forward to hearing from you and hearing your story there in Montana.
Thanks, Stephanie. Life is a crazy making right now. We're harvesting peas and chickling vetch today. All right, and apologies, I have a little something going on in my throat this morning, so just bear with me. I'm excited to share just some of our farm story. Let's see, let me know. Is this up and going?
It looks like, yep, there it is. That looks good.
Okay, great. Well, I'm just always so wonderful to work with Xerces Society. We've learned so much. I think Jennifer was the first Xerces staff to actually come visit the farm. And I often refer to her as my friend who cares for things without backbones. So that's been a long-standing, amazing journey for us with Xerces Society, and I just always learn so much. So I guess at some level I should have been an entomologist instead of an engineer. What I want to do today is take you on a whirlwind tour of our farm, which is really about a system of farming. We have discovered over 15 years, you can't just pick out one practice. Farming is not a checklist. It's really about working with natural systems, and every year is a definite adventure. This year we have pretty good soil conditions and moisture conditions, although the last 2 years we were really devastated by drought. So my heart goes out to friends in Hawaii and Canada and other places where our planetary system is just not stable. Okay, so with that, gosh, I'm sorry about my voice. Let me just jump in and buckle up and we'll take a ride. Okay, here's where we're located on the edge of Canada, in a very rural location. there's less than 5 people per square mile where we live. So we really consider our community all of that amazing critters, the soil microbes, the birds, the flora, the fauna that surround us. So pretty lucky to be in this place. It's 40 miles drive to the grocery store, and typically around us is wheat and not wheat. So what we're doing is really pretty different. There's some pictures coming up I'll show you from the sky. We also are in a place that's kind of on the edge of where you can grow crops. Our average rainfall is 11 inches. Doug and I knew that when we started our farm in 2009, but we also knew that we could likely fund a farm because farmland values here are not like they are in the Midwest. Vilicus is Latin for steward of the land. Doug was, for whatever reason, took Latin in high school, and there were 2 words for farmer. One was agricola and one was vilici. And the Vilicus is really the overseer, a freed slave that oversees the Roman estate. The one that was really held in high regard for taking care of the land over the long term. And we take that really close to our hearts and what we are doing here up at Vilicus. You can see a little bit about how our acreage is split up in any given year. We spend an awful lot of time and resources investing in things that feed and take care of the soil over the long run. We seeded 18 crops this year. 10 of those were for harvest. The rest were green manure crops that just go back to feed the soil. This year also was pretty exciting in that we've transitioned. It's the first year of about 3,000 more acres that we took on 3 years ago into organic production. And you'll see our field borders. We had hoped to install a bunch more field borders in those acres, but the herbicide residues can stay in the soil for over 3 years. And given last year's drought conditions, we experienced 9% of our average production. We opted not to try and seed all those wonderful broadleaf plants. So it's still transitioning, I guess, is that to say, even though by law, the crops off of it are organic. So a bit about our farming philosophy. If Doug was here, he would give you this, but organic really we feel is the place to start. You can't grow food using poisons. We really look to nature as our teacher. And farming is something that we feel really strongly needs to be more professionalized. And because you're taking care of these resources that are pretty amazing. Our land base that we are shepherding and taking care of is probably worth $12 million plus or minus. At one point, the social cost of carbon on just our cropland a couple years ago was estimated to be $16 million. It would be pretty amazing if we were managing a financial fund of $28 million, we'd both be well compensated. So we think that there's a new culture we need to talk about around farming. I saw some pieces in the chat about tillage. Tillage is part of our cropping system. It's an art. We have 6 different tillage tools. It's really about when and where and why do you want that disturbance. So you have to think about it. And the best fertilizer is really getting out and observing. And that's what's so fun about working with Xerces staff, because you actually have to look at things when you're hanging out with them, because you would see things that I would never see. We have 4 farm organisms, we like to call them. So the purple is north against the Canadian border. The yellow is the house where I'm presenting from today. The green land, some of that is land that we originally had from the very get-go. And then further south is where Paul, our foreman, lives, and some other land. So we look at these as kind of 4 different organisms, 4 different kids. They all have 4 different personalities. From our maps, a typical field is not farmed in blocks. We farm in 240-foot wide strips with 20 to 30 feet of perennial buffer in between each of those strips. So this is one of our farm maps. The 3-letter bold designations are what the crop is in any given year. and underneath that is the crops that were in the previous years. So our rotation is not only just a rotation of crops, it's also a rotation in terms of geographic location and over time also. So here's what we look like from the sky. Again, really different from our neighbors. Here it is a little bit up close. And here, I think this was probably 4 years ago. The conservation strips didn't look quite this good the last couple of years, but they're still pretty amazing, all of the diversity and habitat that's in there. And what's phenomenal is that once you invest in this, people would say, oh man, more edges, you're going to have more weeds. Actually, the biodiversity is something that we've really found to be an amazing stacking effect. So a pollinator habitat tour, Xerces helped us host, oh gosh, several years ago now. We found plants that weren't even in our original seed mixture that were native coming up in these strips. The power of Mother Nature to heal and come back is phenomenal. This is right outside the front of the house. I think Stephanie might have used this in one of her slides, but yeah, so this is that field border doesn't look nearly as good now. A lot of that was Coreopsis that came up the first year after we seeded it. So these strips do take some maintenance. There's mowing, there's potential reseeding, but this was a trial where we tried some different types of tillage, different types of ways to get things established under organic production. What I love about this slide is it really shows the stacked benefits of what we're finding for all of these field buffers. So not only is it corridors for wildlife and beneficial habitat, it reduces wind and keeps us buffered from our other neighbors that use different farming practices than we do. Also, another Xerces Society visit from Sarah Holtz-Jordan. These were some of the bugs that we found on that pollinator tour, which was just really, really incredible. And I really don't know all the names of the bugs yet, so that's a learning edge for me. But parasitoid wasp, bumblebees, alfalfa leafcutter bees. There's just a bunch of diversity out there that if you're just walking through and not really paying attention, you'd never see. So again, just to reiterate, this multi-solving and stacking of functions has been pretty incredible for us to watch, because we thought, oh, let's put these conservation strips in because we're in a place that's drier, wind erosion, lighter soils. So we really want to, and we know we have a part of tillage as part of our system. So let's make sure we're protecting ourselves from that. And what we found is once we started seeding them, we're just really addicted because it provides so many other benefits for the farm. Habitat's one of them. The other anecdotal thing that we have noticed as we've converted land from chemical, fallow, no-till system, farmed in blocks into our system with more diversity and strips, is the strips really provide space for wildlife to move and stay and have a safe place. We have far less wildlife interactions with our equipment in fields that we have farmed longer and had the buffers in. Fields that we're just now starting conversion on that are in big blocks. It's really kind of incredible just to see those differences in terms of where wildlife feels that they can stay or not stay. I went around a whole curlew's nest earlier this year while seeding some of our spring wheat. The other thing for us is we don't have a lot of moisture in this ecosystem. So it's really all about where is the water, where does the moisture come from, how do you retain it? And you can do a lot of things with building soil, which we're doing, but soil doesn't build on the same trajectory as quarterly profit reporting cycles, and it takes water to do it. So these buffer strips actually provide a tremendous amount of snow catch. So here's in the middle of winter, and here's in the spring. So you can see on the east side, because we have winds that come from the northwest, it's pretty incredible, the snow that gets caught, that little bit of extra moisture. We can actually see this in our combine monitors when we go to harvest. So edges, a lot of times you think of edges as being kind of a challenge or not a good thing. They're actually pretty fun when you start paying attention. There's so many things happen at the edges. You know, here's a cake. The dogs love to lay on the edge of the house in the sun. And then if you think about all those living roots in the soil, what's going on around them? There is this whole little microclimate around every root in the soil of things and exchange and reciprocity happening. And that's part of the reason why we concentrate so much on the diversity of our cropping system. One edge that we're on, I would be remiss without the picture of Canada. So this is our field, one of our fields against the Canadian border. That's the border fence to the left of the picture. So there's us and Canada, not much, just a 3-wire barbed wire fence. But that's kind of a fun edge also. The core of a lot of our conservation, our conservation centers around our crop rotation. So this is really Doug's brainchild. He studied crop rotation in grad school and studied organic farmers, and he found that really the way to handle diseases and pests and diversity and soil building is really with your crop rotation. So we have a 7-year crop rotation. I'm probably not going to do this as due diligence as Doug would, but I'm happy to answer questions about this and pass them on and talk with anybody that's interested. So first part of our rotation is a light grain, something that doesn't take a whole lot from the soil, typically a heirloom grain, rye, barley, spelt, that's what's in that slot. Then after that, we do a green fallow. So this is a crop that we terminate at flowering and incorporate it as green manure, or we graze it. So this might be chickling vetch, peas, clover. And then that heavy grain follows that. So that green fallow would have provided some nice nitrogen for the spring or winter wheat, tends to be more modern varieties, heavier feeders, which we then follow with a grazing oat or broadleaf crop. So this can be a forager or a scavenger crop, something else that replaces the fallow. So around us, you'll see fields that are just gray. They've been sprayed, the crop residue is left, but there's nothing growing because the thought process here is that we're super moisture constrained. So you don't want any growing thing because any growing thing uses moisture, which is so crazy because Mother Nature wants to cover herself. And there's amazing things that happen within that system that I think the system of growing things and photosynthesis that we're probably missing, just thinking of simplifying it into wheat and not wheat. After that comes a pulse or a fallow. So this will either be harvested, grazed, or green manure. So this could be peas or lentils or vetch again. You can't do a crop rotation in a vacuum by itself. You have to think about what the moisture is at any given time, what happened the year before, what your market is and your soil conditions are. So what's really nice about these two pieces of the rotation is that, you know, for example, this year we had a strip of vetch that we were just going to till in or green manure it. And we decided, wow, it's so lovely that we're going to go ahead and harvest it and save our own seed. So this gives you a lot of flexibility. And then we're back to an oat, grain, or broadleaf. So this might be flax or mustard or buckwheat, something else that isn't in the rotation already. So it's really about that diversity. You know, if we were to all eat just McDonald's hamburgers every day or eat the same thing every day, you know, how would we feel? Not very good, right? So you have to think about, what are you feeding all those soil microbes? What are you feeding all those invertebrates? We need to give them a diversity of diet also. And then we follow with a fallow or a pulse, again, that can be harvested, grazed, green manured. So here's just a few quick whirlwind tours of some of the pictures. Here's spelt. Here was a hulless bronze barley. This was super fun. I didn't know that grains would do this. We grew this early on in our farming adventure. Here I am standing in a crop of rye, which we love to grow rye. It's a lot of the more modern varieties are shorter. There's not as much biomass. And so this is a way to also feed that soil. Here's our green fallow. Here's some chickling vetch interseeded with oats. Here it is when we've blade plowed it or terminated it. So it leaves the cover on the ground, but stops the plant from growing. So it stops it from using moisture, but we've also been able to take advantage of the nitrogen add. Your traditional crop of red wheat. And then here's our grazing oat broadleaf part of the rotation. What's magic about the cows is we own a small herd of Highlanders, Scottish Highlanders, but the majority of our grazing cows were working collectively with another organic farmer south of Havre, who brings their cows up in the summer. Paul, our foreman, strings a lot of electric fence, and we intensively graze them. And that allows Jody and Crystal's pastures to rest a bit, and then us to get the benefit of the grazing enterprise. But then we know how to take care of the cows in the winter. Just another picture. Oats, Doug's walking up one of our conservation strips, which are also really wonderful ways to access and get into your field and see what's going on. Here's some flax getting ready to bloom in the morning. Peas blooming in the evening. Here's Rusty, a previous Jack Russell in a field of lentils. And here was some kamut with flax interseeded. Another interseeding crop. I think it's oats with some clover. And this was safflower. Really stickery. The dogs didn't want to go into the safflower. So the other thing that we've integrated into the crop rotation, typically every third cycle. So if you think of this, it's kind of crazy. You know, if our crop rotation is 7 years and then you throw in a perennial phase, I mean, you only do this every third cycle. So this is like a 25-year undertaking when you add the 3 cycles plus the 3 to 4 years of perennial phase. But we will underseed alfalfa or sandfoin in the grain crop the previous year. And then we let that stand and then we graze it. So no harvest or tillage. We're not even haying these fields, so we're not taking anything off. It's a way to really enhance the soil building. It's a way to deal with some perennial weed challenges. We're pretty lucky. We don't have a lot of weed pressure as other organic farmers may have. And I think that we attribute that directly to our diversity. And like all of us, you have to allow your soil to rest and kind of have a reset piece. A picture of grazing cows. This is a phacelia and buckwheat crop. And then I have to have the gratuitous pictures of the Highlanders because they're just so cute. they're just so cute and wonderful, docile animals that calve very easily and are good at taking care of things. So what's been interesting, and I loved listening to Jennifer's presentation, is I was wondering, 2 seconds. Apologies for the dogs. I was wondering why we haven't had cows until the last 4 years. And we never saw dung beetles or beetles really of any kind. And now that we have cows, the beetles are here. So I was amazed when Jennifer said in her presentation that dung beetles can come from 30 miles away. So that really answered a question I had. And then it's just fun to start digging around in your soil. As I got the books from Stephanie on farming with soil life, I did some reading and I just said, we need to spend a little more time out in our field. So this is a field that that just transitioned into organic. So it had been wheat and not wheat Kimfella for many years before that. But you can see on the bottom right, there's some little critter there. I didn't get fast enough on the camera to catch him or her before they went into their little tunnel. But if you look at the picture up here in the middle top, we're taking some temperature probes. So much like the funnel sampling technique that Stephanie had, it's really kind of fascinating how much temperature difference there is from the top of the soil into just digging down a foot or so. And this particular day, that was a 20-degree difference. So you can see as a plant or a soil critter, that temperature difference, the ability to have a little moisture is really amazing. Here's a field of rye in the field that we first started farming in 2009 and took it out of a not very diverse CRP mixture. So you can see there's definitely some more pores and things going on in that soil. And then just this weekend, we had some farm visitors come that I hadn't met before. This is my new friend, Lucy. They were coming to see the cows because everyone said, oh, we love cows. We want to see the Highlanders. And we had these little baby calves. But Lucy she really didn't care about the cows. She was so much more into the bugs and the toads. And so that was super fun that I was giving this presentation today. So we took a little time to look at the Farming with Soil book and talk about dung beetles and other invertebrates. Here's a few other photos we've discovered as we've just been walking through our field and some of the planting beds around our house. And the resources Xerces provides are just so great because you can pick them up and look at them, and then you can go out and check things out and come back and look at them again and learn something. So in the lower left-hand corner, those are, oh, shoot, it's bad, I'm gonna forget. They're bee flies, and we had thousands of them this year. Well, when I went and looked up bee flies, I discovered that bee flies actually eat grasshopper larvae. So that was a celebratory moment because we have had a ton of grasshoppers the last few years. I think mostly due to drought conditions, but just really fun once you start being able to observe what you have out in your land and whatever plot you have. We've discovered that even small amounts of habitat can really provide a really beneficial outsized outcome. So another favorite poem I have about the prairies, I think that's another sweat bee or leafcutter bee on a native thistle, and another fun time with some Xerces staff again. So reverie is pretty important. You have to have some fun while you're doing all this, but reverie alone won't do it. It also takes moisture. So on the left is Albin with another one of our farm campers. Albin was one of our apprentices. He grew up on a farm in France. He's going to be taking over his family's farm, and he really wanted to learn about organic production at scale. So he learned about us, and we figured out how to have Albin come over and spend 2 seasons with us. So they were soil testing, I think, this day, and it was kind of cold and a little miserable out. But moisture, you never say no to moisture in our ecosystem. So this is our next project. Some bonus material with Xerces coming up is we're doing some hedgerows and eco buffer investigation. So early on when we started the farm, Doug said, wow, it'd be sure fun to plant trees on all of our buffers. And I said, well, that's great, but how are we going to do it? It's just crazy making to farm like we do. And to think that we're going to be able to establish trees or shrubs in an ecosystem with 11 inches of moisture a year, I don't know how to do it. So now here we are 15 years later, and we're seeing in some of our fields that were transitioned into organic production recently, they have historic buffers. These pictures are the windbreak around our house. And we have noticed in these buffers with the shrubs, significantly higher crop production. So we've been intrigued by this and saying, gosh, well, maybe now's the time to figure out how to investigate and explore and use our land as a learning laboratory to see, is there a way to establish buffers? And how can we do it using natural systems? So if you look at this, I took a little ski last winter out our back door and took a look at our windbreak, and you can see how much more snow our windbreaks caught. So lucky for us, we've been working with Xerces. They have an innovation grant where they want to measure the potential to stack conservation benefits for pollinators and climate resilience. So given our last 2 years of drought, wow, this is also a climate resilient strategy for us. This is a way to still have some crop production and provide more diversity, reduce the wind impact, which also I think requires snow catch, which adds your moisture. Like, it makes this really wonderful beneficial loop. So the idea here is to take one of our fields. So the picture on the left is a section of land, so that's 640 acres. We are farming the half of that section that's to the left, and plant approximately 3 miles of hedgerows in there. So in field 33, there's some existing hedgerows. This is one of them, and on the picture on the right. So we're just going to try a half mile. But if we could scale this up, this whole idea of agroforestry or working with nature, man, we potentially have 300 miles that we could do this on. But we're only doing a half mile because it's a lot of work. What we're going to do is we're going to put in snow fence, and we're going to plant the trees in October, which is kind of an experiment because normally trees in our ecosystem get planted in the spring, which is also crazy making because we're trying to seed all the crops and do the farming work in the spring. So could we plant trees against a snow fence in the fall, water them when we put them in, and then the snow fence serves as that initial shot of moisture and water catch and a little windbreak buffer for them. So we'll see how it goes. Angie from Xerces came out, end of June to look at this project with us. Here's some more pictures of the field that we're going to be planting. So you can see I'm standing by one of the existing hedgerows, which is a Siberian pea shrub, which is a non-native but very drought tolerant, is a pollinator species. What we're going to do is take our 20-foot buffer and plant 2 rows. One row will be Carigana, because we know that will establish. The second row will be a series of miscellaneous other native pollinator plants that we're going to work with the state nursery and see what actually establishes and works for us. So a good learning project. So Angie came and we did some insect inventory here. The picture on the right, if you look far down on the horizon, you can see the windbreak, so the existing buffer. And so we're going to plant from where that tape measure is down to that wind buffer. So this field, given we had severe drought the last 2 years, didn't produce much. There's a lot of kochia, some weed pressure here. This is early in the spring. And we hadn't seeded this buffer because we knew we were going to be planting trees later in it. So I was super surprised, like, gosh, what's in here? Is there really critters? Well, there's life everywhere. Just incredible. So here's Angie. We did some bug sweeps. We did some pitfall traps. And again, I don't know all the critters in there, but so fun just to be out and see what we got. All sorts of shapes and sizes of things. And we did a little sampling in the existing windbreak, and wow, that was a whole set of different critters. So who would have thought, just driving by, you wouldn't have guessed all the life that exists. So if anyone wants to come help us the week of October 9th, we're going to have the Conservation Corps and a bunch of volunteers, and eat some good food and have a lot of fun. So just send me an email if you want to travel to the northern, up north. So just to summarize here, we've really been trying to work on cultivating our relationship with the land. Stewardship is core to all that we do. And it's an evolving, continuously learning process. When Doug and I started this venture, oh gosh, in 2009, man, my 40-year-old self wishes at some level I knew what I know now, but it's probably better I don't. But we had no idea the challenges and the fun that would be inherent in taking this massive project on. We had no idea we would have the opportunity to scale to the level of land management that we have. We have some lovely landowners that care about what we're doing. We have people seeking us out to farm because of our practices. The challenge has been finding people. It takes people, it takes critters, it takes patience. And that's a story that I don't think a lot of individuals who aren't farming truly understand or can connect with. It takes a lot of organic food. We try to always have once a week a farm crew dinner, so we get a chance to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, what happened that week, share a story about the food and where it came from. And lucky for us, it also takes a few organic beverages. So our next venture that we're starting to grow is to sell our rye directly to distillers, bakers, and millers. This is the crew from Glacier Distilling that sits right outside Glacier National Park on the west side, and they have a tremendous amount of tourists that go through their distillery every year. So in 2024, making whiskey is kind of like building soil. You can't do it on quarterly profit reporting cycles. 2024, starting 2024 and on, we are the sole rye provider for Glacier Distilling, and we're working with them to talk about our Be Better certification, our practices, and help educate their consumer base around where food and beverages actually come from. So another fun story. But to do what we do, it also takes capital. So as you've seen in all the presentations previous on this day, you can wish to take care of habitat, but you also have to say, how do you do the work no matter how much it rains? We grow cover crops to feed our soil microbes. And if it doesn't rain and we don't have any crop production, that's a pretty challenging place to be in. The level of support for operations like ours, especially the diverse complex operations, is not there in the same way that it is for operations that are using more conventional practices. All of our USDA programs have been built around those types of use of chemicals and practices that are considered good farming practices. And so this has been another learning edge for us, is if you're doing intercropping, technically you aren't supposed to be able to insure your crop. So wait a minute, you have NRCS on one side saying, hey, do this intercropping practice because diversity is better for soil. And then you have risk management telling you, oh, I'm sorry, I can't insure your crop because you're doing a prohibited practice. So it's kind of crazy making. So our idea around all this is we have to continue to cultivate relationships with each other. This is another fun picture at the Canadian border. Anyone that visits always has to go see Canada. But we have to find ways collectively that we can create conditions so that many more humans can understand and join in this work. It's not just about providing conditions for your soil invertebrates or your birds. It's also about providing conditions where humans really get to thrive also. So that's one of our edges. So if you want to join in and help us, we envisioned this new program last year called Community Supported Stewardship Agriculture. It's a riff off of the community supported agriculture model that smaller farms that are more vegetable oriented use, where they have a set of shareholders. People pay up front for the food, and then they get a box of food no matter the production. What we're suggesting is for farms like ours, we need to decouple the work of the stewardship service from the income stream of annual crop production. And this is our big experiment. So check it out. I'd love to have some feedback on this. We've gotten about 65 or 70 members so far, and we're doing a lot of sharing and learning with those members because they get a direct connection to the farm and what's going on there. We also have launched a nonprofit specifically with the idea of bringing life back to the Northern Great Plains and doing this in a way that really works for all beings. We are so lucky to have this for-profit farm with a 12,000 plus acre land base that we can do so much with and do so much learning. Doug and I just feel that pretty urgent. We can't have a lot of duplicating efforts happening. We don't have much time left with climate change, and the more that we can share out what we've been learning and doing, that's the purpose of the Institute. Okay, so with that, it all comes down to community. Land is part of the community that we belong, and if we can remember that it actually leads to a cultural harvest for all of us. So with that, I'll stop. I think I left enough time for a few questions, possibly Stephanie and Raven. I'll stop sharing. All right, again, apologies for my voice. I didn't think I was yelling too much yesterday outside in the wind.
Yeah, it looks like right now we have one question in the chat, and someone is asking what kind of trees are you planting?
Oh yeah, so the two rows, one row will be Siberian pea shrub, which is Carigana, which is a non-native but very drought tolerant, and we know will establish. The other set, the other row is going to probably be chokecherry, big sage, a variety of things that we're going to see that the nursery has available in the fall, but they will all be native pollinator species and somewhat randomized. So it's going to be another perspective, another big experiment.
That's great. Does anyone else have any other questions for Anna before we move into resources? If you do, submit them into the Q&A and we can talk about them.
There's one, Raven, just above what kind of trees?
Oh, okay, let's go find that. They're also wondering if neighboring or other farmers are interested in what you're doing at your farm. Also said, really great examples and images.
Thanks. I think our neighbors are curious. Some of our neighbors are curious. Some of them are not very friendly. And I don't know how much of that happens because we're not from here, or we really just do things very differently. But there is a very nice set of organic farmers in Montana that we work closely with. Our friends Jody and Crystal south of town. We share a lot of equipment. And so I think neighbors that are curious it's always fun to have a conversation with them. So it's just going to take time, because it's not just about changing your mindset. It's also about the support structure that exists around existing agricultural operations, and to let go of that support structure and do something different can be really overwhelming.
Great. We've got a couple more questions. One from the Q&A is all of your crop production with dry farming?
Yeah, there's zero irrigation. It's all whatever Mother Nature gives us.
Another question, if you were able to go back in time, what is one thing you would want to change?
Oh, that is a really good question. Probably, I don't know if we could have done this, but to have a stronger economic support set of advisors around us. Because every farm, in a way, every farm is like a beating heart. They do so many important things for the community. And I don't think I really conceptually understood that. I also probably would have started differently with the labor. We've had a long-term apprentice program, and that has been really challenging. This next generation has a very different perspective on risk and long-term commitment, and those ideas are not necessarily coherent with what it means to be in agriculture. So for example, this year we've actually moved to having 3 South Africans come over on H-2A visas, and we've just done so much learning about what's happening in South Africa. They just want to work and are just really wonderful human beings.
Another question, could you elaborate on timing, purpose, etc. regarding tillage, and do you do any no-till?
Oh, certainly. So we could have a whole nother presentation on tillage. We see tillage as a tool that has to be thought of thoughtfully. It's kind of the art, is what Doug calls it. So we have a high-speed disc called a speed tiller that we like, that's 2 inches deep. It's really just to mix in the residue above and make a seed bed. When we take the crop rotation out of our perennial phase, we use a moldboard plow that turns the soil over. It's part of the reset, buries all that alfalfa or clover or sandpoint residue. So it's really, what is the reason for the tillage? Where are you doing it? And what the timing is. What are the soil conditions? There's times you can do really bad tillage, and there's times it's really helpful in terms of establishing a seed bed. Another way we think about tillage is it's kind of like a butcher knife, right? Like you can take a butcher knife and you can go and you can stab somebody with it. Or you can use your butcher knife to artfully take care of a heritage animal that grew and ate really good food that you're going to eat, and thoughtful about the impacts of that. So that it's a tool. It's not that tillage is bad, it's the way that we're using the tools.
Great. Do you see any opportunities for the farm in light of the recent court win about protecting a healthy environment, specifically the case the youth won in Montana?
Say that again, Raven, I didn't catch it.
Yeah, so do you see any opportunities for the farm in light of the recent court win about protecting the environment?
Yes, I haven't thought deeply about this. I'm super proud that Montana has the right to a clean and healthy environment in their constitution, which is what the youth were litigating around. And so as I think we can use our farm as a mechanism to talk about climate resilience and agriculture differently, and how agriculture can add to a clean and healthy environment. So I don't have a direct connection yet to any of those youth, but I think it's a larger conversation that's well worth having about what future are we co-creating.
Another one, apart from the increased abundance of beneficial insects in the flower strips, have you observed any significant drops in populations of pest insects within your fields?
Well, I can't say we've actually done any inventory on pest insects. I can just say that pests have not been a problem for us. Although this year there was a lot of grasshoppers. There's been a lot of grasshoppers the last few years. And so we did see some issues on the edges of a few of our strips that got seeded later. So the plants were more susceptible from grasshoppers, but that's it.
Back to tilling, Susan's wondering, so it sounds like there are different depths of tilling, shallow or deep. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, certainly. So is it deep tillage we only use when we're coming out of that perennial phase, or we need a really clean seed bed for a broadleaf crop? Like flax doesn't compete very well with other weeds. The general tillage that we use is just to really 2 inches deep max to provide a seed bed and incorporate whatever crop residue and weed structure we might have on the top. Our seeding technique is we tend to do tillage a week or 10 days in advance of running the air seeder, because it gives a chance for weed seeds to germinate, get into the kind of the white root stage. And then when we come through with our air seeder, it knocks those all out. So it gives the thing that you're planting, be it oats or wheat or lentils or spelt, a competitive advantage.
Great. A couple more questions and then we'll have to wrap it up. From a management perspective, which crops in your 7-year rotation net you the most benefit economically while provided the greatest ecosystem services for invertebrates?
Oh my gosh. Whoever asked that, you want to come help me do a study? I have we have all the data. That's really difficult to say because it's really about a system, and it's about a system of diversity. And we've had years where we've seen much more variability in the climate. A lot of the old timers around here see more variability and are admitting that. We've had years where we have had terrible wet spring, couldn't get into the field. We're so glad we seeded winter wheat because the winter wheat was able to grow and start coming up. That same year, we also had rain in September that we never have, and we had grain sprout in the field. So we're really glad in some of those cooler years we had lentils or peas. So it's not really one crop, although I will say the crop insurance protection around wheat and grains is greater than some of the other crops. So given that we've had less production the last 2 years, we've made some choices that we don't really like to do, but we've put more into grains this year in 2023 because we really need to have the economic income happen.
Few that came in quite early. I said I would answer live, so let me get through with those and then we can focus on the ones that are for Anna. So one was, are soil organisms unique to ecosystems or are they ubiquitous? That was posted early, and hopefully now after going through more of the modules, the answer is more obvious, but almost anywhere that there's soil, there are going to be soil organisms there. The exceptions would be if something has sterilized that soil through chemical or physical means like heat. But many of these organisms are mobile, others are less mobile, but can repopulate areas over time. And certainly within a given group, there are certain species that may be specialists in drier, more well-drained soils. Some are adapted to colder climates, and vice versa, and that whole range there. So yeah, there are certainly specialists, but there's almost all soils have some soil organisms. How can we think about invertebrate health in soil through the seasons? And what time of year are soil invertebrates most vulnerable? And at what times of the year are they most resilient? This is a really great question. And I guess for the sake of this course, I'll just have to generalize here. But there are certainly periods where one life phase or another is more active. It's either the larval or the adult stage. So that's more easy to see. And I wouldn't lose sight of the time and the phase when those are in egg stage or pupal stages. Those are less mobile. But certainly the management impacts that are happening on soil can still affect those stages. Some groups overwinter as eggs, some overwinter. When I'm saying overwintering, I'm really talking about what's the harshest season. So in some arid or hot climates, that might actually be summer. So yeah, unfortunately, just I'm painting with a broad brush here, but depending on the location and the climate, there are times when the species are in a stage like egg or pupa, but they're still present. Then we get into grasshoppers. One is, do grasshoppers contribute to soil health? So generally, grasshoppers are not considered soil invertebrates. Many species of grasshoppers do lay their eggs in the soil, but then those eggs hatch. They might be a food source for some of the soil invertebrates, like Anna mentioned with those bee flies. When the eggs hatch, grasshoppers are a group of insects that have incomplete metamorphosis. So they're just like they're nymphs that are essentially tiny versions of the adult grasshopper. And grasshoppers primarily feed on living plants. And from a human perspective, that means we would categorize them typically in the pest category. Animals that feed on dead plants we think of as beneficial because they're helping to process and recycle those plants. So in a bit of a nutshell, that's kind of where grasshoppers fit in this whole conversation about soil invertebrates. Then the other grasshopper one, maybe we can use this to pass it back to Anna, but someone is commenting that they have a plethora of grasshoppers in the yard and around the house. So many that visitors comment on the numbers. The yard is a semi-prairie with plenty of remnant smooth brome. Smooth brome is not native to North America. It was a forage grass introduced from Eurasia, but widely growing over North America. And then that question ends with, what's up with all the grasshoppers? And I'll put you on the spot, but pass it back to you to maybe talk about that if you would, or what are grasshoppers like on your farm?
Yeah, we've had a lot. I don't quite know why so much the last few years. I think it's probably related to the hot, dry drought conditions. There's another Xerces staff I had been talking with last year about grasshoppers, and one of the USDA agencies was really looking at spraying broadly. And it just tells me that there's something out of balance with the system, that we have so many grasshoppers, and to just go in and spray for grasshoppers doesn't really take into account birds that eat grasshoppers and where all this stuff ends up in your system. So yeah, I wish I had a better answer for the grasshoppers. I don't, other than there must be something that's really out of balance. And I guess the one other thing I'd add is the more that you can work with your soil to the extent possible and provide healthy plants. I mean, healthy plants are kind of like healthy humans. You have a functioning immune system that isn't quite so aware. You're not impacted as much with pests and disease. Pests and disease tend to get things that are already having a challenge.
Yeah, thanks for that, Anna. I mean, one more thing, like we talked about, insects are part of what turns plants into food for other animals. So grasshoppers are food for birds and wildlife in that way. And I think their biology is such that they have boom and bust cycles. You know, there's kind of the biblical plagues and everything. So yeah, there are these yearly cycles of imbalance, but certainly diversity can help to smooth that out a little bit. We're getting a lot of positive comments and compliments in the chat, so thank you all for that. And then I'll hand things back over to Raven to take us through the last few questions from the Q&A.
Oh yeah, real quick, Stephanie, there, maybe Raven was going to do it. I think someone asked what's up in October. Well, October is when we're doing our hedgerow project. So if anyone wants to come to North Central Montana on the Canadian border and help plant half-mile of hedgerows, just send me an email.
Great. Yeah, that was going to be the question that I was going to answer or ask, I guess. There's another one for you in the chat, or Anna. How do you replace the phosphorus fertilizer lost in harvest?
Great question. That's why we have cows. And that's also why we're working with other neighbors that bring in their livestock off the open range that they have. They bring their livestock into holding and feeding pens for the winter, and then they have manure. So we also are with compost operation of that manure, and then we spread that on our fields. And that's it's not for the nitrogen, it's strictly for the phosphorus.
Got it. I think that is it for the questions that I have seen. Steph, have you seen any others come through? Maybe from earlier. I think we got them all, but
one person had just mentioned some of their practices with planting apples and maples. And I don't know if that was just a comment, or you could make sure Anna knows about that in case she does want to respond or hear it.
Yeah, I think it was, I've had terrific success planting my apple seedlings in fall after germinating in February and growing in my greenhouse all summer, then 2 to 3 weeks acclimatizing in the shade of maples.
Well, that's great to know. Well, I think that's going to be kind of our learning edge here, is what can we do in the dry northern Great Plains to establish plants, and can we do it in the winter or in the fall and then have them survive?
Great. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I do want to just remind everyone that this course will be added to the Farming with Soil Life playlist on the Xerces YouTube channel, and all who registered will receive an email with the link to the recording once that is ready, likely within a week from today. We're also going to be emailing you a PDF of the presentations and the e-packet that we shared with you with all of those great links to all these resources. Anything else from Steph or Anna before we hop off?
Thank you, Raven, and thank you so much, Anna, for everything you're doing on the ground, in the ground, above the ground, and for sharing your time and experience with us today, especially in the middle of harvest season. Thank you.
Thanks for all you guys do too.
Thank you all so much for joining us today, and a huge thank you to both of our amazing presenters. I know I learned a ton, and it seems like everyone had a great time. So without any other questions, I think that's it. Thank you all again.